One of the interesting things about Charles Houston is that it was very clear from the beginning that he had come from a privileged background, privileged in relationship to the majority of African Americans in the United States. He had come from a family in which his mother had at one time been a teacher. His father was a lawyer. His father was the head of his own law firm. Charles had an opportunity to attend a high school that was designed to prepare black students for college.
Houston went to Amherst College in Massachusetts, one of the only black students in the school. He graduated summa cum laude at the top of his class in 1915. He left school acutely aware of his minority status as a black man, but he had no plans for a life of legal or political activism. That was about to change. Along with 200,000 other black men, Houston volunteered for duty in World War I, the war to make the world safe for democracy. But he served in a segregated army. Although Houston was an officer, that didn't protect him from Jim Crow. He and the other black officers were given substandard housing next to a latrine. They were often restricted to base and harassed constantly. Overseas in France, Houston even had to face off a lynch mob of white soldiers. Houston later would write, "The hate and scorn showered on us Negro officers by our fellow Americans convinced me there was no sense in my dying for a world ruled by them. I made up my mind that if I got through this war, I would study law and use my time fighting for men who could not strike back." Once back in the United States, Houston found Jim Crow more entrenched than ever. In 1919, there were 78 lynchings, 10 of the victims still wearing their army uniforms. In 1922, the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated in Houston's hometown, Washington, D.C. The people for whom the Civil War was fought watched the ceremony behind a rope designated colored.
Thus, Charles Houston began to see even more clearly that it was the administration of law, the lack of justice, it was a primary concern for him, so that when he went to law school, he fully intended to begin to study the law with a view towards being able to use the law to change that situation for his people.
In 1920, Charles Houston took his first step down the road to Brown. He entered Harvard Law School. Houston became the first black editor of the prestigious Harvard Law Review, and one of his professors, future Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, called him one of the most brilliant students he'd ever taught. After graduation, Houston undertook a survey of black lawyers. In the entire South, he found fewer than 100 black lawyers serving 9 million black people. Houston wrote in the Journal of Negro Education, "The great work of the Negro lawyer in the next generation must be in the South, and the law schools must send their graduates there and stand squarely behind them as they wage their fight for true equality before the law." Houston realized that a legal challenge to the Jim Crow laws would require a cadre of young black lawyers armed with a zeal for social justice. Houston got the chance to forge this team in 1929. He was appointed Dean of the Howard University Law School. Houston raised the standards, improved the faculty, strengthened the curriculum, and got the school accredited. From Maryland came Thurgood Marshall, a tall, gangly youth who would become the first black justice on the Supreme Court. From Virginia, there was Oliver Hill, who would become the first black to be elected to the Richmond City Council. Houston's own cousin, William Hastie, joined the faculty and would later become the first black federal judge. Charles Houston was gathering the forces to fight a war, a legal war, against Jim Crow.
What he did was to use the law school as a breeding ground for testing issues on the faculty with the students. And then as Houston began to be called upon by lawyers and communities across the United States, then the United States became the classroom, his classroom.
Houston was ready now to take on Jim Crow. Only one thing was missing. Houston needed an organization linked to the black community, an organization capable of broadening the attack on Jim Crow. That organization would be the NAACP.